So should we jump into it then, or?
Sure, let's start.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Erwin Ostindi. I work as the president of the Wild Bird Trust of British Columbia. I'm a volunteer, and so welcome to my colleagues and peer volunteers or future volunteers. This is a workshop we're presenting with Marissa Bischoff, and Marissa is supporting us for a few months on contract to help us with planning our habitat work, our operation systems, and part of that, key role of that is our volunteer program. And I think you'll hear through the workshop today, Marissa laying out kind of the past, present, and future of our volunteer program. And it's an important time because we came from a period of being, now we're 27 years old, with a provincial focus, to being a organization mostly focused on Maplewood Flats in Tsleil-Waututh territory. And we've transformed our organization, which you'll hear about. And with that transformation comes an important role for our volunteers. And we can talk about it later, but I think even for me, the term volunteers is problematic because I really think about it as active participants or active members, or it could be even engaged citizens, people who live in the area or people who are keen birders. So volunteering is a kind of a weird word. We're going to use it today because it defines a relationship, but really we're talking about people stepping up and participating in citizen science and participating where they live. And we're hoping that folks find Maplewood Flats to be an important place to do that work. And Maplewood Flats is, we talk about the unceded Tsleil-Waututh lands and waters, and it's no coincidence if you're down there, you won't see a glass bubble around the Maplewood Flats separating jurisdictions. Really, when you think about the history of Maplewood Flats, you think about an industrialized area that Marissa will talk about. And you'll also recognize that the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and their reserved land, which is a colonial system, is just to the east of us. And in fact, the Tsleil-Waututh Nation is doing far more restoration and work towards our mandate than in fact we are. So it's critical that we not just do a territorial acknowledgement, but that we really consider that Tsleil-Waututh have always been here, and as well as Squamish and Musqueam and Coast Salish peoples. We talk a lot about Tsleil-Waututh because they're immediately right next to us. There is a Squamish reserve land just by the Seymour River as well, so it's very critical information. So for us, territorial acknowledgement is not about lip service or saying here's the welcome mat, but really it's about a way of being, a way of conducting our organization. And I would say that we would describe that as decolonial work, that we're really decolonizing the site as its caretakers. And we're also decolonizing our own organization. So that's what I'm doing right now as a territorial acknowledgement, is in a way a manifestation of our commitment to decolonizing our own practice and recognizing that in many ways we're in service of that repairing of the relationship, rather than it being our space, our Maplewood Flats, and somehow there's these neighbors over there. So we're really kind of disrupting that old school way of seeing things and really trying to welcome and decolonize our own thinking about the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish that are our neighbors. So without any further ado, I want to pass it to Marissa, who will take us through the workshop, and look forward to hearing people's questions. And again, this will be videotaped and saved so that we can share it later and share it with our friends and share it with our colleagues. So other people aren't with us today, but they'll be watching this on video. So I want to be mindful and welcome those folks as well.
Thank you, Erwin. That's great. Yeah. So, and on we go. To make sure that we don't get lost during this presentation, we'll review what we'll talk about at the beginning. So first, we'll go over some of the history of the Maplewood Flats area and the formation of the Wild Bird Trust. We'll go over some of the values that make up this organization, what's our mission, and do you share some of these values? And then we'll discuss some reasons to volunteer with us. And then I'll move on to detail the different ways you can become involved with the Wild Bird Trust. And then we'll finish with question time. And feel free to add your questions to the chat as they arise for you during the presentation, so we can address them at the end. And you can find the chat just in the middle bottom there. You can just click it and it'll pop up. So how did we get from here, 1926, and before then, to here in 1990, and even more developed 30 years later? Well, as Erwin mentioned, the Coast Salish people successfully and sustainably lived on this land for more than 13,000 years prior to settler contact, by way of hunting, gathering, growing, cultivating, and trading resources. And then around 1859, some arbitrary exclusionary lines began to be drawn on British maps along Burrard Inlet. In the early 1900s, extensive logging of the forests surrounding Burrard Inlet began to pick up, and it would become common to see large log booms out on the water, not unlike this one. Historical relics of these log pilings remain on the flats today, and they actually now serve as a mounting post, or they're also called dolphins, for the over 100 nest boxes for purple martin colony that returns each spring. So around the mid 20th century, a sand and gravel company ran a mill and extracted gravel in the Maplewood Flats area and across Dellerton Highway. When you come for a walk to Maplewood Flats, you'll likely cross a bridge and over a channel of water. And you might not realize right away, but that channel is actually artificially built to transport the extracted gravel and sand. And we call that the Barge Channel today. This is actually a picture looking down into the inlet from across Dellerton Highway. So since the late 1800s, a range of working class people, from artists to industry workers, unable to afford the local expensive housing here, built and lived in squatter shacks along Burrard Inlet, including near Maplewood Flats. The intertidal area was like a jurisdictional gray area, and they were able to live there for quite a few years. But in 1971, the District of North Vancouver started to burn down the last shacks in Burrard Inlet after receiving numerous complaints from local residents over the years. But today you can see an artistic homage to these squatter shacks named From Shangri-La to Shangri-La by Ken Lum, and the replicas that are now installed in the Barge Channel at Maplewood Flats. Some other industrial activities in and around Maplewood Flats included use as a trucking depot, dredging of the marshes on the south side for an area that was going to be for a seaport that never came to fruition. And it was used as a kind of a dumping site for all sorts of construction debris like pavement and metal and garden soils. Finally, after extensive lobbying by the community and other environmental groups, the District of North Vancouver designated what is now known as the Maplewood Flats as a conservation area in 1993. And at the beginnings of the Wild Bird Trust as a nonprofit charitable society was formed in order to manage it. The landscape of Maplewood Flats today would be unrecognizable to what it was there just 50 years ago. So there's been a massive regeneration of plant life, both intentional and unaided. Over the years, the Wild Bird Trust has added infrastructure to the conservation area, including a bridge over the Barge Channel to provide access to the western side of the site, a greeter hut at the trail entrance, and a series of freshwater wetlands, constructed wetlands across the conservation area, a Coast Salish native plant nursery, which now serves as a source of funds to fulfill our mission, and the Corrigan Nature House, which has a large meeting space in which to facilitate aspects of our mission, such as nature house education programs for kids, art and cultural exhibits, educational presentations, and event hosting. And also, if you didn't know, it's available to the public for venue booking if you're ever looking for a spot. It was open to the public in March 2015, and the Corrigan Nature House was made possible with the support of the Norbury Foundation, Doris and Jack Corrigan, and many other generous donors. In recent years, the Wild Bird Trust has acknowledged that in the formation of Maplewood Flats was the inherent continued exclusion of Tsleil-Waututh Nation from their traditional lands and waters. And we have been taking steps to move forward in reconciliation and redress. The Wild Bird Trust is working with Tsleil-Waututh Nation through the Treaty Lands and Resources Department on a protocol agreement and an alignment of joint interests.
I'll just add, Marissa, that I like how you've laid that out, that history, because I think when I became involved about 5 years ago, I mean, I grew up in North Vancouver, and so I knew the area well, and I actually coincidentally did a postgraduate certificate looking and researching that area of the waterfront and the history of artists and squatters using Tsleil-Waututh's lands in the past century. And it's funny that we prided ourselves as the Wild Bird Trust in saving this land. And it became evident that eventually we realized, that's just an absolutely wrong perspective to hold. We didn't save the land. In many ways, we actually excluded Tsleil-Waututh by taking what was essentially a brown site, an industrialized site, which was not a beautiful site. It was an industrial site. It was a post-industrial site. And we started to create this, what we have now, this beautiful, beautiful area. But so the language and discourse is actually really important because it frames our understanding of what we're talking about and our relationship to those words and ideas. So I think what you presented is a more healthy way of, and a more pragmatic and humble way of seeing this history. And we should also make sure that we include the Port of Vancouver, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. So they're one of our landlords and carry a huge amount of sway on the use of the waterfront there. We also have heavy industry, including the only chlorine factory on the west coast of North America right next to us. So we're a bit of an oddball. We're a beautiful wildlife sanctuary surrounded by heavy industry, and that brings its complications. And we work, there's a steering committee, which is the Fraser Port Authority, the Environment Canada, which has a research center at the front of the site, and the District of North Vancouver, as you mentioned. So as of yet, the Tsleil-Waututh are not actually officially on our steering committee, just those other 3 government agencies and departments. So moving forward, we really have to reconcile with the continued exclusion of Tsleil-Waututh in how we caretake. And we have a lease to the site until 2041, so that's also worth noting.
Sounds great.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for adding that, Erwin. It's very valuable. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the values of the Wild Bird Trust. And these values are actually neatly surmised by our mission statement to provide wild birds with sanctuary through ecological protection and restoration, and to support communities with education, culture, and reconciliation programs. So conservation and habitat restoration is an ongoing commitment for us. There are many ways in which we approach conservation at Maplewood Flats. There's invasive plant management through activities like plant pulls. For example, the picture on the left shows some staff and volunteers testing out a method of eradicating the invasive yellow flag iris. We carry out regular native vegetation planting. We conduct regular bird surveys. And we also provide opportunities for researchers to conduct studies. For example, in the photo on the right there are some BCIT students doing some water sampling in a wetland at the conservation area. And just this summer, actually, we had a student from Capilano University doing a study on the invertebrate communities in our wetlands as well. Going on to education. So utilizing the natural environment and infrastructure here at Maplewood Flats allows us to provide our community with educational content about conservation issues, Indigenous knowledge, and workshops. We offer events such as bird walks, lectures, presentations, and nature education programs for kids. Another way in which Wild Bird Trust is spreading awareness of local issues is through our semi-annual publication, Wingspan, which is sent to all members for free. Going on is to culture is an important aspect of building a sense of belonging and community. The Wild Bird Trust considers art to be an important expression of historical, social, and environmental issues. Art and photography exhibits are regularly displayed within the Nature House, and permanent art installations can be found throughout the conservation area. Additionally, every year, the Wild Bird Trust organizes and hosts the Osprey Festival, an event celebrating community, conservation, art, all while honoring Coast Salish land and peoples. And most importantly here, we have reconciliation. And like Erwin was mentioning earlier, it's a term that implies that there was a good relationship to begin with. But at the Wild Bird Trust, the board is assuming a more proactive stance in terms of committing to real action to repair mistakes in the past and move forward with respect, honesty, and humility to build a better and collaborative working relationship with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and other Coast Salish peoples, who are the original and ongoing stewards of these lands and waters. So it is our intention through this work of repair and redress to ensure things shift so that members of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation community actively use and view this space as their own. Do you have anything to add, Erwin, to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting what you just said when the last thing you said about how Tsleil-Waututh people identifying, and because it's so close to the reserve lands, as well as other folks living in the area, I think a marker of success would be when we have a whole generation of children from Tsleil-Waututh, from the daycare programs, and as they grow up, that they feel an identity to the site.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I think that will be a marker of success. If in 5 or 10 years from now, we can look at our membership, we can look at our volunteer program, we look at our staff, we can look at all aspects of our organization and say, are Tsleil-Waututh members identifying, connecting, participating in our organization? And that would be, I think, a marker of success.
I agree. That would be great. Good representation. All right, so we'll move on a little bit to how can you become a volunteer? So if you're excited about the values of the Wild Bird Trust and the work we've been doing to fulfill them, I'm sure you're anxious to know how you can join. So firstly, to become a volunteer, you have to be a member. And the reason for this is mainly to make sure our volunteers are invested and committed to the core values we just discussed. Volunteers are really the main driving force behind the Wild Bird Trust and are really instrumental in the success of many of our activities and events. And even if you don't become a volunteer, becoming a member will give you other benefits like the free Wingspan magazine sent to you, reduced pricing on workshops and events. You can materially support a lot of this work that we just mentioned in conservation, education, culture, and reconciliation that directly affects the community. And most importantly, in terms of this workshop, is that you have the opportunity to volunteer. But what can you gain by being a volunteer? I want to kind of throw this out to the people watching. So what are your motivations for wanting to volunteer? Anyone want to add anything? That's okay.
Laura's got something to say.
Yeah.
I really fully support the work that that Maplewood Flats is doing in Wild Bird Trust. It just aligns with my values, and I think it's super important, and it's actually a really unique blend in terms of its programs and what it's offering. And so I just think there's lots of opportunities, and that excites me.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it excites me too. Yeah. Anybody else would like to add anything? Okay, that's okay. We'll keep going.
And I think what Laura is also highlighting is the fact that volunteers, like I said, it's about active membership. I don't like this codification of I'm a volunteer, but frankly, I could be a staff person or I could be an active resident because I care about the site. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to envision the site as a platform. And I'm using kind of technology, contemporary language there, but it's like a platform where we can do that reconciliation and education work. Lovely comment from Hazel about giving back to the community and supporting about supporting conservation. So the notion of being a platform, so it actually is an opportunity. One could volunteer by simply partnering. So if someone's working with another organization on the North Shore, or a birding organization, or a conservation organization, or a First Nation group, collaborating with Wild Bird Trust on a project is, in a sense, a type of volunteering. It's a type of collaboration. So I think this notion of, a colonial notion of, we're a nonprofit society and there's a president and a staff, and then you're the unpaid volunteer at the bottom. Like it's just sort of nonsense, because in a sense, if we're looking at it holistically or ecologically, by participating, by adding ingredients, by adding time or energy or contacts or money or a project idea or a partnership on a project, that's equally, if not more valuable than someone who can contribute a few hours a month to do some work on the trails. So codifying volunteers is problematic, because we really want people to participate and show up. And if that's distance or with rain boots on a rainy day, it's all the same.
Right. Awesome. And thanks for your comments in the chat too. I really appreciate your participation. Okay, so other things. Yeah, so like we basically talked about just now, you become an integral part of the local nonprofit. You contribute to the growth of our organization. Everyone adds something different, and you will gain experience, knowledge, and conservation, and how to interact with the public, depending on what volunteer role you choose. And you exemplify the values that we spoke about. You'll be able to build meaningful relationships with like-minded people, many of whom will have been drawn to the organization for the same reasons we have. And finally, for people or young, especially younger volunteers who are looking to kind of buff up their resume, we do give reference letters out after 30 volunteer hours over 3 months. And of course, you're here to have a fulfilling experience. And like we kind of discussed, this can be a lot of fun, and working under these shared values can really help us achieve our goals. All right, so next we'll go over the different ways that you can dedicate your time and efforts as a volunteer with us. And so right at the top, we have our board of directors. They're the body that oversees all of the committees, the finances, the staffing and operations of the Wild Bird Trust. And it can seat up to 16 people, but I think right now there's just 12. And there's also some committees that meet 1 to 2 times a month and are mainly involved in the organization and planning of Wild Bird Trust activities and events. And there are the quote unquote regular volunteer roles that do more on the ground and frontline work, boots in the mud, as Erwin mentioned, work on a weekly basis. Do you want to add anything to that, Erwin?
Yeah, just to, yeah, boots in the mud, but as those, none of those folks have boots on in the photo, but the fact that we have now a phenomenal nature house built 5 years ago and now being activated, it means that in many ways we operate as a public art gallery. So we're looking for gallery sitters. So, you know, it's an unusual site, as Laura said earlier, where we have these platforms, the outdoor education, the indoor education, gallery preparatory workers who hang shows. You know, someone could come in and hang a show once every 2 or 3 months, and that would be what their contribution is. Mm-hmm. Someone else might want to sit on a fundraising committee, recognizing that the organization has, when I was involved, started being involved in 2016 on the board, to now we have a 2.5 times larger budget. You know, so we went from $120,000 annual operating to 237 to 260,000 now. So with that comes more oversight. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we have very ambitious and creative minds, but we're also fiscally conservative. So we want to make sure that we have the expertise from our board members to our committee members who understand and who feel a sense of accountability. Joining a committee is not just you show up once a month, and it's you typically once a month, and that you know, it's like a social group, and then you come back a month later. It's really, we're trying to cultivate a practice of accountability. So you participate because you have a vested interest in it, and you rely on your other committee members, and they rely on you. So it's reciprocal. It's an accountability. It's like mutual aid. Mm-hmm. Because there is no boss in those committees. There's no boss saying this is what we're doing, and then the minions. We want to practice this mutual aid, in a sense, a participatory democratic model where we could say that the members, the active members, and the committee work is actually the heartbeat of the organization. Mm-hmm. And that members and volunteers have an ability to ramp up and scale up their participation. With that comes more responsibility, more leadership they can practice, and more impact on the organization they can have. So do feel like, you know, if you just want to show up once in a while, 100% fine. But if you want to get more involved and it becomes something that you're really committed to in terms of your life, and you want to share that and learn from other people and be accountable to other people in that work, then find a working group or a committee that matches your interests, whether it's habitat or programming or whatever Marissa is going to lay out for us. And we'll help with training, but it's about active participation, not passive participation. And that's how we're really changing the organization into this engaged participatory democratic structure, rather than a kind of a hierarchical one where 3 people at the top make the decisions and the people execute them at the bottom. You know, we're very much transforming that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's amazing how the amount of funds doubled in such a short amount of time, which I assume is just like a direct result of volunteer efforts into the organization. Pretty cool.
Yeah,
okay.
and recognizing that I mentioned earlier, we have some heavy industry neighbors, and I think without being too critical of our past, we sort of did our thing quietly. But I think when I think about who is that we, exclusively white people, exclusively white middle class people, exclusively white, middle-class, middle-aged people doing their thing. And so the Wild Bird Trust was very much a bastion of a certain kind of worldview and group of people. And yet, when you look outside on who uses the trails, it's not that demographic. So I think there was a challenge to the Wild Bird Trust to say, who do we pretend to be when in fact the birding community is majority women? And yet you look at the birding community, the leadership in most birding organizations, it's people who look like me, it's white men. Mm-hmm. So, you know, looking at demographics, making sure that people feel welcome to come in. And so having the organization reflect who's using the site and building the organization to reflect that, rather than thinking of ourselves as some kind of a service body that's quietly taking small amounts of money from this heavy industry, giving us $1,000 donation, a $2,000 donation, while Kinder Morgan is building a pipeline and tankers are going to be coming off the shoreline, and we shouldn't be saying anything because that's political, and yet we're quietly taking these donations from heavy industry next door, not participating in this discussion around what's the role of heavy industry in environment, protecting the environment. Not to say that heavy industry doesn't have our neighbors don't have a role, but really transforming that and saying our membership, the community broadly, can participate in these ideas. These are not political ideas. These are habitat and restoration and promoting biodiversity. When we think about what's the impact of heavy tankers going 200 meters from the wildlife sanctuary. You know, this is an issue not that's about politics. This is an issue about
people protecting
wildlife. And so we're open to that kind of dynamic worldview and inclusive worldview.
Yeah, really great points, and really important things that we need to consider and talk about for sure. All right, so we'll move on to the committee. So there are 4 committees that you can join. The first one is the programs committee that helps to plan and develop programs that relate to our mandate that we've been talking about this whole time, including educational programs, which include school programs, nature walks, interpretive displays, panels or symposiums, speaker series, etc. And also cultural programs like literary events, exhibits, public art commissions, and publications. And there's also the communications committee that manages and plans for our social media profiles on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. They build and maintain our website, and they help with our Wingspan magazine, trail signage, and of course, media releases. Next, we have our habitat committee. They develop our habitat and cultural use management plan. They help plan for restoration projects, site maintenance, birding, birding surveys, and ecological research projects, as well as the Coast Salish plant nursery planning. And finally, but not least at all, is the fundraising committee, which helps with grant writing, special events, donor relationships and appeals, and the bench program. Okay, so next we'll go into the details of our, like we said, quote unquote, regular volunteer positions. And the first one we have here is the site maintenance and habitat restoration position, whose main duties include planting and promoting the growth of native vegetation, performing trail maintenance, which entails keeping trails clear of debris, cutting back encroaching plants, and helping with trail repair, and invasive plant control, and promoting healthy habitat features for native species. Okay, and the next one we have here are exhibit and interpreters, who support visitor access and engagement with exhibits and educational displays. They help to host evening events, and they're responsible for opening and locking up after finishing evening shifts. And there's some daytime and or evening availability for that position. Trail hosts will walk the trail in pairs to interact with the public. They'll respond to questions from visitors, and they'll share resources about birds and wildlife. And also they'll act as an extra set of eyes and ears along the trails to monitor for safety concerns, trail conditions, and any incidents or activities that might need special attention. A requirement for this role is that you must be able to walk the trails easily. Okay, so the Nature House host. As the Nature House host, you will welcome visitors as they enter the site, You'll hand out Wingspan magazines and maps. You'll receive donations and try to promote membership sales. And right now we're not really doing this because of some COVID restrictions, but to come, it'll change. You'll be able to do this again. If you're more into virtual outreach, we have the social media community manager role, where you'll post scheduled and new content on social media, and you'll manage our public interactions online. Also, if you haven't already, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter with the handle @Maplewood Flats to see some unbelievable content. I'm sorry. If you have or want to gain some experience with plants, consider volunteering at the Coast Salish Plant Nursery, where you'll be able to have help with plant sales and education. You'll tend to the plants and you'll contribute to nursery outreach and development. And currently the nursery operates on Saturdays from 11 to 2.
Yeah, and that's a seasonal thing too, where we have a huge amount of burst of energy in the springtime.
Yes.
Also, just quickly mention, we have a Coast Salish plant a nursery growth project going on right now. We received funding to do social enterprise development, and we're really going to be, in a year from now, you'll see massive change both in the nursery, but also in the area between the nursery and the waterfront, where we're doing a demonstration garden of plant material from the nursery with interpretive signage. So we're trying to use, to borrow that expression again, a platform. The nursery is very much a platform to talk about reconciliation through conservation, and it's a thing that people can bring home to their own gardens. And when they buy plants, they buy a plant, one plant goes home with them, and one plant gets planted as a restoration act. So it's a way to support our social enterprise is really also a way to kind of promote and advance our values.
Exactly. Yeah. Some exciting times to come, and exciting time to join for sure. Okay, so we'll go on to the next position, which is the data entry volunteers, which help by entering monthly bird survey data onto the online eBirds citizen science platform, and other data entry tasks as they arise. And next is the archivist, which will help us with records management and organization, as well as helping to digitize old physical files, which we have quite a few, as I understand. And from time to time, so that's the end of those regular volunteer roles. But from time to time, there will be call outs sent to our members for volunteers with specific skills. For example, currently we need people that are knowledgeable about CRMs, have volunteer coordination experience or fundraising experience. And we're always looking for contributors to our Wingspan editorial. Occasionally, there are other volunteer opportunities, such as monthly bird surveys and helping with the purple martin nest box setup, takedown, and inspections, which is really interesting thing to participate in.
So Marissa's going quickly adding these ideas, but it's a good example of the fact that we've got the formal committee structure, and then within the committees, we actually have these working groups. So one of those working groups is the Wingspan Editorial Collective, which is a part of the communications committee. So one could join the communications committee, be involved in planning and oversight for all the infrastructure, the website, Wingspan, social media, things like that. Or they could just bury down and say, yeah, I don't have time or interest in that, but I really want to just focus on my writing skills or editing, and I'll just join Wingspan.
Exactly.
Equally, I don't want to join the habitat committee, but I just want to join a group that does bird surveys. So you can kind of graduate your level of participation. And you mentioned CRM. That's for non-geeks. That's customer relation. What is that? Customer relation management software.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's basically, we're going to be converting our old school data entry work and bringing in either Salesforce or Nation Builder to kind of use technology to our advantage and help us engage better with all of our members, volunteers, and donors.
Exactly. So if you have those skills, please reach out to us. Okay. So, the other thing is, you don't have to be pigeonholed, like Erwin said, into any of these positions. So if you start out as a site maintenance volunteer, but you want to become more involved in the organizational planning, you can move between all of these positions as long as you reach out and get details. Okay. So that's pretty much it for today. So we've learned a bit about the industrial past of Maplewood Flats, the values we try to uphold here at the Wild Bird Trust, and the large variety of ways that you can become involved, as we've just spoken about. If you are interested in volunteering in any of the positions I've detailed, or if you have any other specific skills you think might be helpful, or you have any questions that you think about later, just please don't hesitate to email us at volunteer@wildbirdtrust.org to see if you can, when you can start as well. And we're always looking to recruit more volunteers, and all are welcome. And